Hello again. I pressed stop instead of pause, so I had to end that last recording because my recording software doesn't allow me to continue after I press stop. Okay, so this is the rest of my game with Evan Welsh, rated, pardon me, rated 1767. He played knight takes c3. I've just won a pawn on d5, and he figures he might as well at least get the two bishops, so he plays knight takes c3. And I had to choose between rook takes c3 and b takes c3 here, and I decided on b takes c3 because rook takes c3 allows black to trade a pair of rooks, which still leaves me with a weakness on c3, but it makes it so that he can now move his a rook somewhere active. Whereas if I play b takes c3 as in the game, the a rook can't move. Evan played bishop to e7, getting his bishop out of danger. And I was really anxious to rid black of the two bishops. So I played knight to f5. Maybe there was a better move, because knight f5 allows bishop takes f5, rook takes f5 when we have bishops of opposite color. But I reasoned that with two major pieces left on the board for each player, I'd be able to develop winning chances because of these bishops rather than allowing an easy draw. Bishop to f6 from Evan hits the pawn on c3. I played c4. And he played b5, which I'm not a huge fan of, because after my c5, my c-pawn is passed. And since I have a majority on the king side, I may be able to develop another passed pawn over there, and those two pawns maybe can combine to create queening threats he can't deal with. He played b4. I played rook to d5, looking to reestablish my control of the d-file, insofar as I can have that. He played rook to c7, looking to double against my pawn on c5. I played rook c to d1, intending at some point to invade on the d7 square. He played g6 to give his king room to get out, which makes sense, and I played bishop c4, looking to, at some point, threaten to grab the pawn on f7, which I was hoping would force rook f8, which would make my pieces more active than his. King g7 from Evan, and I played e4. And at this point I'm threatening e5, when this bishop's going to be pretty uncomfortable, and maybe a later rook d7 and e6 will win a pawn. Evan played bishop to c3, and I played bishop to b3, with the idea to bring... I say idea a lot, don't I? I've got to stop doing that. The point of bishop b3 was to put this bishop on a4, controlling, I guess, different light squares in black's camp and looking to get some kind of advantage that way. a5 from black, bishop to a4, and rook a to c8. And this puts pressure on the c-pawn, of course, but I have the move c6, which locks that pawn down on c6, where it can't be targeted by the only black minor piece. So black now can't get rid of this pawn without sacrificing an exchange. And Evan, short on time, decided to do that right away. But I think if he had had more time, he would have found a way to defend without doing that. Rook takes c6, bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, and now white should be technically winning. I didn't want to play rook takes a5 immediately because after b3, the rook would be under attack, and there might be either b2 or b takes a2 advantageously for black. So I played rook to d7, looking to come in behind these pawns. a4 from Evan, and rook to b7, so that b3 now, well, b3, a takes b3, a takes b3 loses a pawn for black. Wonder if he could have played a3. No, I guess not, because I have rook to a7 immediately, and though he can defend that pawn, it's basically never going to move to a2. So Evan played rook a6, getting the rook behind the a-pawn in advance, and I think this was a very nice move, a very good way to try to stay in the game. I played rook c1, reasoning that after his b3, I'd be able to play rook takes c3 and get back in time to stop the pawns. For example, b3, rook takes a3, b takes a2, rook a3, and the capture of his more advanced a-pawn. So he played bishop d4 instead, but this is a blunder because it drops the pawn on b4, but I'm confident he only played it because he had a matter of a few seconds on his clock. And at this point he resigned. So I was at 2 out of 2 at this point in a 4-round tournament, which is pretty good. And Mike Stevens in the lower section was also at 2 out of 2, having beaten his second-round opponent. But I had to run back to my car again because I was once again late to restart the 3-hour timer on the parking space. Luckily I once again didn't get ticketed, but I only barely made it back in time for the start of the 3rd round. And I was paired with Arun, rated 2251. An extremely strong player and, in fact, the top-rated player in that tournament. So this was happening on board 1. And coming into this game, I had a record of 1.5 out of 2 against Sid, but I had played him twice 5 years ago. So a lot of time has passed since then. And I had white in both of those games, whereas I had black here. He played d4, I played d5, and he played knight c3. This is an opening that I think has been made famous by a grandmaster named Jobava. It's called the Chigorin, and it's unusual for white to stick his knight in front of his c-pawn. But the idea is that he's going for more piece activity and therefore some kind of early win of material or the obtaining of some other kind of advantage. I played knight f6, he played bishop f4, and I played e6. And Sid was playing very fast here, which I remembered after the fact is how he often plays the opening. But not remembering that during the game, I thought I was running into some kind of theory that was going to cause me to lose a quick game. I didn't quite understand knight b5 because I have knight a6, and then black's going to play c6, and this knight has to retreat. But it's not bad because white will eventually play e3, and then this bishop will be threatening to mess up black's queenside pawns by capturing on a6. And that knight, even if it doesn't get captured, is pretty awkwardly placed over there. Sid played a3, taking the b4 square away from me. I played c6, and he played knight c3, and bishop d6. Okay. But having been worried that I was going to somehow lose on the queen side at the start of the game, I was much more relaxed here. He played e3, and now he's threatening to take this knight on a6. Perhaps I should have played b6 right away instead of a move later. But instead I decided to trade on f4 first, and then play b6. But this allows him to go knight f3 and immediately stick that knight on e5. And then after I castle kingside, if I ever take that knight on e5, a white pawn is going to come to e5, which is going to deprive me of the f6 square, which is going to make it hard to defend my king. So maybe this was not the right way to go. I played queen c7 here, he played bishop to d3, and the computer points out that for a couple moves in a row, black should be playing c5. I looked at this game with a computer because it ended up being so wild, so crazy, that there was no way I could analyze it on my own. I played queen c7, not quite fast enough. Black should be playing c5 as quickly as possible, looking for counterplay before white develops an attack on h7. Bishop to d3, knight b8, again here c5. But I played knight b8, figuring I'd come to d7, capture this pawn, this knight on e5, and trade pieces in that way and get closer to equality. He played g4 though, and things are looking scary now. He intends g5. If necessary, he'll throw the h-pawn up the board as well. He's got his queen and rook and bishop and knight all over there to attack my king, and all I really have defending is this knight on f6. Knight bd7, g5. This would be extremely bad, I think, if I weren't just in time to play knight takes e5. But this is still not so hot, because after f takes e5, I either have to retreat my knight, leave as I did in the game, leaving my king without any real defenders, or I have to sacrifice a pawn with knight to e4. And though both ways looked not very good, both options looked not very good, I thought against a player of Sid's strength, just going down a pawn without real compensation for it was liable to result in a drawn-out loss. So I decided to hang on to the material and play knight d7. But this allows queen h5, which I intended to respond to and did respond to with g6. But what I didn't realize here is that white has a really strong move in queen h6. When he's going to go h4, h5, and take on g6 once or twice, maybe a third time with the queen, or play queen h7, queen h8, big trouble for black. But Sid played queen h4 instead. This kind of allows black to remain in the game. I played c5, finally getting some counterplay, and this gives him the b5 square, which I expected to see his knight land on its way to d6. But if black doesn't play for counterplay with c5, trying to break down white's center and open up the c-file, then there'll just eventually be a checkmate somewhere on the king side. f4, I guess Sid didn't want to play d takes c5, because then I might play knight takes e5, or actually, sorry, not knight, queen takes e5, check. And then recapture on c5 and blacks up a pawn and is no longer in any serious danger on the king side because the queen can defend along the long dark squared diagonal. So he played f4, guarding e5 again. I took on d4, and I expected knight to b5 followed either by knight d6 or knight takes d4. But he played knight to e2. And yeah, I had been very worried, but at this point, given that the knight is pretty far away from the g4 square, a square it wants to get to in order to be able to hop into either f6 or h6, I felt pretty good. I played knight to c5, threatening this bishop on d3, which is an important attacker for white. And Sid castled kingside. I expected knight takes d4 instead. And here there was an opportunity for black to, I thought during the game, suddenly play for an advantage. It looks a little bit strategically bad. Not this part, knight takes d3, c takes d3, but the next move, queen c2. And that's because these black pieces are all undeveloped. And it shouldn't take too long for white to do something like rook f3, rook h3, and get black in a lot of trouble. But it was just too tempting to go after the b-pawn, the d-pawn, and the knight on e2. So I played queen c2. I was also sort of playing with reckless abandon in this game, figuring that since this is the first game I've played against a higher rated opponent in quite a while, it would be the most affordable loss rating-wise, and I just kind of wanted to have fun with it and see what happened. Sid played rook a to e1, protecting the knight. I played queen takes d3. I was looking at a variation here which leads probably to a perpetual check. Knight takes d4, queen takes d3, rook a to d1, and then queen e3 check, king h1, queen e4 check. White can block a check somewhere around here, but it's pretty awkward to do, so I figured he wouldn't, and we just end up going king g1, queen e3 check, back and forth. Of course, he doesn't want to draw with me, so he played rook a to e1. I played queen takes d3, and he played knight g3. And I was afraid of f5. Though the computer says I shouldn't be, as computers often do, and I should just play bishop to a6. Instead, I played bishop d7, trying to keep an eye on f5, while freeing up the c8 square for the rook on the queen side. Bishop a6, though, is stronger. I may reveal an attack on the rook on f1, and f5 turns out not really to be a threat. I don't know which capture is better, but for example, e takes f5. And then if e6, I can just capture with the f-pawn, and the rook is helping out at this point. And if knight takes f5, I can just play g takes f5, and there isn't even a follow-up capture on that square. So it was totally okay to allow this, I guess. I played bishop d7 instead, and Sid played the nice move knight h1. And his plan now is to go knight f2 with tempo, and then knight g3, knight f6 check, and queen takes h7 checkmate. I got my queen out of the way before the knight would hit it on f2 by playing queen f5, and now the queen is kind of guarding the f6 square in certain variations, and I was looking ahead to maybe not, sorry, one sec. I was looking ahead to the possibility of playing h5, and then after g takes h6, queen to h5, forking the queen on h4 and the pawn on h6, hoping that that would be a way to stay in the game. Sid played rook f3, threatening to come to h3, and here I think I really missed an opportunity. I could have played rook f to c8, which looks ridiculous because white's going to play rook h3. But now the idea is black does something to continue developing, like bishop b5, and after queen takes h7, king f8, queen h8, king e7, there isn't really a way for white to achieve a whole lot here. My queen, thankfully, is guarding f6, so if queen f6, queen takes, some pawn takes, e takes f6, I can move my king somewhere, let's say to the d6 square, and then I have a couple ways to defend this pawn on f7 if necessary, and I've got passed pawns on the d file. So this would have been the way to defend, but I didn't see that, so instead I went for, after rook f3 I played h5, and Sid played g takes h5, and here there's the option to go queen h5, queen f6, threatening mate, queen takes h6. And I was going to do this originally, but I thought I saw some way for white to kill me, like knight to f2, and now he's threatening rook h3, maybe, not really, but maybe there's knight g4 coming. But this appears to all be some big ghost I saw, because I think after knight f2 I can just go queen g7. So that's too bad. I'm sorry to have missed that. Missing yet another defensive opportunity, I decided to play kind of creatively here. I played g5, and after his rook to g3, pinning the pawn and threatening rook takes g5 check, winning the queen, I played f6. And normally this would be ridiculous, but white's king is also very exposed, so I was thinking maybe I'd find counterplay this way. Sid took on f6, I played queen takes f6, and now he can take on g5 with check if he wants, but it no longer wins the queen on f5. He played f takes g5, I played queen g6, and though this is about to change, at least for this half move, we're in a very weird situation in which black has 3 passed pawns and white has 3 passed pawns. And I guess with black against a very strong opponent, this is the kind of game I'm looking for, something unbalanced to which I might have a chance to win. Sid played queen takes d4, though, eliminating that interesting situation, and white is probably just better here, but it's very double-edged because both of the kings are extremely exposed. I played rook a to c8, looking for rook c4, which would bring that rook into the game. And after Sid's b3, which I thought at the time was way too slow, I invaded with rook c2. I considered playing e5, just as an example of hope chess, because he might play rook takes e5 when I can play queen b1 check, king g2, queen f1 checkmate. Of course, a 2200 is not going to do that. And in fact, he doesn't even have to play queen takes e5, he can play queen takes d5 check, so that would not have been a good idea. I played rook c2 instead, and he played h4, a move I didn't even look at, but which is pretty strong. His intention was to play h5 when a capture on that square by my queen would allow white's queen to come into g7 with checkmate. So I had to scramble to find some way to defend my position here, and I managed to find rook f7, so that now after h5, queen takes h5, if white keeps attacking with g6, or maybe h6, some pawn move, black has queen to h2 checkmate. Once again, he was not going to fall for that, though. But I think rook f7 is a reasonable defensive move. But Sid played queen d3, trading off queens and entering an endgame in which he has more material. I think the computer didn't like this, actually, because of the next couple of moves I played. But I didn't follow it up very well. I played queen takes d3, rook takes d3, rook f4, looking to start eliminating his kingside pawns and maybe harass his king, which is currently pinned to the back rank. He played h5, and here I guess I went astray. The computer points out that d4 is a nice move when black is going to bring the last piece into the game with bishop to c6, and then these three pieces are going to coordinate well against the white king. I played rook h4 instead, kind of a stinky move, but I wanted to start gobbling up his h-pawns. And he played knight f2, and I thought I had a good response prepared for this. I played my rook back to f4, basically saying we can repeat the position. Because if he moves his knight away to somewhere other than h1, let's say d1 or whatever, I go rook to g4 check, and then I pick off the pawn on g5. But he had a very nice move prepared for me here. He played rook to g3, sacrificing the knight on f2, and after rook f takes f2, he played g6. And these pawns turn out to be significantly stronger than this inactive bishop on d7. I thought I had a defense here in rook h2, so I played that, but it's not much defense at all, and he pretty quickly played another very strong move, rook f1. And now it's nearly impossible, or it is impossible, to stop white from somehow getting a pawn through with, for example, g7, rook f8, and g8. I tried bishop to e8. As I mentioned, if I had played rook to h5, g7 is very strong, when I'm not going to be stopping rook f8 check. So I played bishop e8 instead. I was just hoping that white would fall asleep and I'd get the chance to somehow sacrifice my bishop for one or more of these pawns. But he played g7, threatening rook to f8, followed by g8 queen, checkmate. So I played bishop f7, guarding the g8 square again, but he just played rook takes f7, when a recapture on that square allows the queening of his g-pawn. So I resigned here. I guess I'm always a little bit down after a loss, but this one wasn't too bad because he was higher rated, and I had chances with the black pieces, which I guess is what I'm hoping for. Okay, after this game I had kind of a big headache. I haven't had the mental stimulation of 3 or 4 chess games in a day in a while, so I wasn't used to it, and I wasn't feeling very good after this game. So I decided to withdraw and not play in the last round. But Mike Stevens, at this point in the tournament, was at 3 out of 3 in the lower section, and so was in contention for prize money in the last round. He ended up losing, unfortunately, to his 1800 rated opponent, but still had a great tournament overall and achieved a new high rating of 1548. My rating dropped by a few points, but I had a great time, and I may go back this Saturday for another tournament. Thank you for watching.